Hello, welcome to the first part of the third essay in my ever expanding exploration of flourishing in an age of abundance. Essay 1 admittedly was pretty depressing. Essay 2 was a lot more optimistic, and now we are getting into the definition of what flourishing is in order to be able to start thinking about how we can achieve flourishing. So this is part 1 of a kind of mini series on what is flourishing according to some of the best, greatest philosophers of all time. And I studied a bit of philosophy at university, and I really always much preferred the philosophers that talked about life, the moral philosophers that talked about what it meant to live a good life. Much more relatable than some of the more obtuse theories and branches of philosophy that, quite frankly, I couldn't understand. So this is a summary, these 5 essays, these 5 principles of what is flourishing according to philosophers, really covers some of my favorite philosophers, my favorite people throughout history. It is a non-exhaustive list. I'm sure there are so many philosophers that I have totally ignored, that I've probably never heard of. But these are some of the main players when it comes to this question of what it means to flourish and, quite frankly, how to live. So principle number 1, we're going to cover today, use your head. And then in subsequent essays, which will release twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're going to go trust your guts, get out into the world, embrace your humanity, and then finally be useful. If you take these 5 together, use your head, trust your gut, get out into the world, embrace humanity, and be useful, then you've got a pretty good cross-section, a pretty broad understanding of what it means to flourish. So I hope you enjoyed this 5-parter. It really took me back to some of my undergraduate days, which is great fun. I put a little bit of a Smith's reference in at the beginning, in the very, very first paragraph, actually. So anyone that gets that, shout out to them. And yeah, also thank you to Beth, my wife, who not only is looking after our 3-month-old as I read all of these really, really amazing books that I haven't read for years, but also edits every single one of these essays that I write. So thank you very much to Beth. Anyway, on with the essay. What is flourishing? Introduction. What is philosophy if not a study of what it means for humans to live well and flourish? The intellectual pursuit of how to live a life with a joyful sense of purpose and meaning. When our race is nearly run and we are afforded that opportunity to reflect, can we be satisfied with the patchwork life that we have been lucky enough to compile? What does it mean to make the most of the miraculous fact that we get to live on Earth as humans? To revel in every ist and every ism, every idiosyncrasy and every epiphany, every path taken and every road not traveled. How to flourish is a question that philosophers from Plato to Nietzsche have taken extremely seriously. This question forms the essence of a practical philosophy which aimed to marry the philosopher as writer of complex theories and eloquent essays with the philosopher as a living, breathing person. From Ralph Waldo Emerson's retreat into the woods to Diogenes the cynic living in his ceramic barrel, these philosophers were expected to practice what they preached, enacting their philosophy in their search of flourishing. Flourishing, living a good life, achieving a more than fleeting state of happiness is deemed as the most important and worthy end in life. We need the awareness to acknowledge when pursuits, ambitions, and relationships pull us further away from a state of flourishing, mindful of the allure of the easy option, the shiny object, and the expectations of others. This end, the good life, living life according to our purpose and our personality, is not the summit of a mountain, always just beyond the eye line, but indeed it is a narrow woodland path where we walk slowly, observing our inner monologue, taking care over the textures and tones of branch and trunk. In this wood, we walk with a sense of calm, a harmony achieved between our inward nature, our outward actions, and the world around us. Unlike the fleeting euphoria of summiting a mountain, a state of flourishing can be sustained throughout our lives. Aristotle, in his foundational Nicomachean Ethics, was forthright in his assertion that our actions and ambitions should only be pursued if they result in the ultimate goal of achieving happiness. We choose happiness for itself, and never with a view to anything further, whereas we choose honor, pleasure, intellect, because we believe that through them we shall be made happy. Aristotle defines this aspiration as a state of eudaimonia, roughly translated as having a good spirit, or in other words, living according to virtue. Importantly, eudaimonia is an active state. It is a conscious pursuit, experienced only by living in the world. It is not a philosopher's navel gazing, nor is it a passive existence. It certainly isn't a life of mindless pleasure. Being asleep or catatonic with drink, drugs, or any other vice designed to remove action and agency is not, to Aristotle's mind, flourishing. We need to be out in the world, living, working towards this pursuit of eudaimonia. 16th century French philosopher Michel de Montaigne continues to pull on this thread, seeing life as a game to be played and played well. To Montaigne, there is nothing so beautiful and legitimate as to play the man well and properly, and no knowledge so hard to acquire as the knowledge of how to live this life well and naturally. Philosophers of every tribe and era would likely agree with both Aristotle and Montaigne that we should aspire to a state of flourishing. However, the question that engages and energizes philosophers and poets alike, and where we see such divergence of opinion, is what constitutes a life well lived. If we are all so different, is it possible to bring together a consistent and uniform philosophy of flourishing? And what of context? Can a state of flourishing remain constant across region and period? Is it living the authentic life of Diogenes, who rejected materialism by living in a ceramic barrel? Or the image of Descartes, shut up alone in his room all day, completely free to converse with his own thoughts? Or is it Emerson, enraptured by 1,000 forests in one acorn, alone in a landscape which belongs to the person who looks at it? Or indeed Rousseau, who saw feeling, imagination, and purity of thought as the most noble pursuit? Is it a life of reason and logic, or a life of intuition and sensation? This essay presents a non-exhaustive overview of what it means to flourish according to some of the Western philosophers who thought deeply on the subject. Despite their contradictions, when taken together, these principles take us closer to what it means to flourish. As Walt Whitman asserted, "I am large, I contain multitudes." And therefore to flourish will likely constitute a combination of these principles. I have divided this brief survey into 5 core principles as we seek to better define flourishing. Use your head, trust your gut, get out into the world, embrace your humanity, and be useful. When taken together, I believe these principles provide a foundation that allows us to move from understanding what flourishing is to knowing how we can achieve a state of flourishing in our age of narrow abundance. But before we begin, it is worth noting that our philosophers tended to come from comfortable, if not privileged, backgrounds. And therefore, it was assumed that their readership would have already hurdled the bottom rungs of the psychologist Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These lower needs, that of food and shelter, safety and good health, provide foundation stones required to start scaling to the higher echelons of Maslow's hierarchy. Flourishing for our philosophers concerns the rungs of love and belonging, esteem, and at the top, self-actualization. Or, as Maslow describes, the full use and exploitation of talents, capacities, and potentialities. Such people seem to be fulfilling themselves and doing the best that they are capable of doing. These philosophers implicitly acknowledge that the pursuit of our flourishing is not possible without the firm foundations of basic human needs: food, shelter, and health. Therefore, this is the point from which we will begin our exploration. Principle 1. Use your head. If you wish to converse with me, Voltaire famously stated, define your terms. For Voltaire, the archetypal Enlightenment man, to summit the mountain of our unique species is to diligently pursue a life of rationality and reason. It is only from this lofty vantage point that we can see things clearly, with views stretching for miles, a cartographer's dream. For Voltaire, it is reason alone that makes us men. It is what distinguishes us from animals. We can only flourish, therefore, when we are actively pursuing this God-given capacity to use our heads. We use our reason to dismiss the dangerous folly of superstition and mysticism, overcome prejudice, and tame the impulses of our animal bodies. We use our reason to determine the right path to chart, the correct decisions to make, and ultimately how to achieve the highest state of flourishing. We feel most at home using our brains, weighing up the pros and the cons, following an argument, working on a brain teaser, figuring out the answer. Reasonable people feel at home with evidence and with facts or proof. Satisfaction lies at the bottom of a well-ordered list or at the conclusion of a well-crafted argument. Enlightenment thinkers, these reasoning machines, as Emerson called them, owed a lot to the ancients, in particular Aristotle, who believed that the basis of a eudaimonic life was one of reason. To Aristotle, who invented the formal study of logic, reason was the basis of happiness and the underpinning of virtue. For Aristotle, as an axe chops wood and a pencil writes, the function of man is an activity of the soul in accordance with reason. The act of reasoning is, according to Aristotle, both our primary function and our ultimate pursuit. It is the highest faculty of man, the exercise of the highest happiness. But can we take reason too far? If reason is what separates us from animals, then it is the acknowledgement of the limitation of that reason which keeps us from the madhouse. The Enlightenment philosopher René Descartes, he of "I think, therefore I am" fame, stretched the pursuit of reason to its absolute limits. A mathematical genius who made important contributions to algebra and analytical geometry, Descartes' epiphany was to use his precocious faculties to solve the problem of the universe and find a definitive proof of God's existence. His Mathesis Universalis was humbly intended to be a general science that explains all the points that can be raised concerning order and measure irrespective of the subject matter. His ambition was to find a way of proving metaphysical truths that are more evident than the truths of geometry. That he presented some of these philosophical epiphanies as dreams go some way to understand the effects of locking oneself in a room all day and reasoning one's way to a moral, spiritual, and metaphysical theory. Voltaire, who was both a contemporary and early admirer of Descartes' genius, acknowledged that reason was not the correct weapon in our mental armory to divine nature and solve the problems of the universe, caustically concluding that Descartes appeared and just did the contrary of what he should have done. Instead of studying nature, he wished to divine her. To Voltaire, using our heads, exerting our rationality on the messy world around us, is a necessary precondition for flourishing. However, he recognized that reason alone is not sufficient to divine the world, nor is it the only precondition for flourishing. As we will explore in the next essay, a dose of reason must be taken with a spoonful of intuition if we are to truly flourish.